this afternoon we are going to get into debates. And the great thing about debates is they give us a chance to challenge our ideas, think deeply about what we think, and whether we might even sometimes have been wrong about the things that we think, which is a scary thought. And our first debate today is going to be about unlearning privacy. Now, privacy is a really vital topic, right? Because we all have a conviction that privacy is a fundamental right. But we also care deeply about transparency. We care deeply about data as a public good. And sometimes there can be a tension between these things that we care about. So when we get into these tricky issues, we get into ideas like radical transparency, data protection, the public good, the public nature of data, it's going to take somebody really, really smart, or a couple of really smart people, to help us navigate those ideas and to help us think deeply about them and maybe even come to an understanding of what we really think about these topics. Fortunately, we have a number of brilliant minds that are going to help us understand this through a debate. So we're going to welcome a couple of debaters and an incredible moderator today. Our debaters are going to be Alex Hanna, the Director of Research at the DAIR Institute, and Udvav Tiwari, the VP of Strategy and Global Affairs at Signal. And they'll be moderated by Lauren Henry Parsons, the Director of Communications at Mozilla. Please help me welcome them for this debate today. Thank you all. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Neil, and hello, everybody. I just want to say up front that there is incredible glare off the center of the floor, so if I seem to be closing my eyes half of the time, I'm reveling, delighted as an Australian who's usually based in London to be faced down with the full brunt of this solar force. I want more of it. I'm delighted by it, but I do want to warn that there may be some closed eyes towards the audience, but we're completely here with you, I assure you. Well, welcome everybody to Unlearning Privacy. We're here today to look at one of the fundamental tensions that I think sits through all of the technology conversations that we're having at the moment, and that is the tension, the clash between privacy as a fundamental right and the need for data to be open as a public resource. It's a really gnarly one, and I hope that today we'll be challenging assumptions, exploring some of the preconceptions you might have, and maybe even having you walk away with some new ideas. And I certainly hope that my ideas about privacy will be challenged. While I'm here as Mozilla Foundation's Director of Communications, the reason why I'm on this stage talking about privacy with these wonderful humans is my background was in cybersecurity and VPNs, chairing the VPN Trust Initiative and sitting on the Internet Infrastructure Coalition board, where I was out there fighting for privacy to be a fundamental human right. And here on this stage, I hope that I'll be here to ask the questions that create opportunities for all of us to unpack maybe these tensions. And about 40 minutes through, you two will be invited to step up to the microphone and to ask questions of these wonderful panelists. And I'm going to throw it over to the both of you. What brings you to this stage? What brings you to this issue?
Thank you. I've spent most of my career working in non-profit technology companies that understand both the value of the products that they develop, but also the value in building products that showcase how technology can be done differently. And a key thread throughout that work has been privacy. Prior to Signal, I was actually at Mozilla, and one of the things that really sets Firefox apart in the market is the fact that it showcases how privacy can be done on the web rather than just talk about why it's really important. And I think it's a very natural place for me to come to talk about at MozFest.
Well, we're glad to have you back after many years of being a Mozillan. Alex.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be in conversation with y'all. I'm very excited about it. And I think the reason I'm here is because I've done a lot of thinking about data, and especially with regards to AI systems, but with even how I think as people in this room, technologists and academically computer scientists really think about what data is, what kind of object it is, and how it gets treated. And so when we're thinking about data from that perspective, I think we're thinking about a lot of things, not just privacy as an element of it, but also labor and also what that is saying about how that implies everything that's downstream from data. And so I think that is really what I'm bringing here and hope to bring into this conversation.
It sounds like we've got some good potential angles to come at the debate with. So the title of the debate is Unlearning Privacy. I'd like us just to start, let's dive straight in. What aspect of privacy and the way we think about right now do you think is most harmful and most outdated? What mental models do you think we should be abandoning around privacy?
Yeah.
Let's start off, Alex.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing that this sends me completely up the wall is the notion that privacy is a wholly technical problem and that you can just solve privacy. The notion that with the advent of differential privacy or the different kinds of mechanisms that we have algorithmically are ways that are a solve. We see this kind of in so many different places, whether it's differential privacy or federated learning or any of these different types of modalities of addressing privacy. And so that really sends me up the wall. There's a few good examples of how that isn't the case. Something like Microsoft Recall is a good example. Who knows what Microsoft Recall is? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Yeah, so about half the room. So Microsoft Recall was this tool which they said was AI powered, but if you go through the stuff, the documentation, you don't really know where it said. I'm assuming it's because they have OCR involved, which is very funny to call OCR AI, but nonetheless. And effectively what it had been doing is taking screenshots of users' screens at particular intervals and then storing them locally and saying, well, it's not a privacy issue because it's local. I was like, well, depends on if you have a mental model of who is using the computer. If you have more than one user of the computer, then that's not a private thing. It can become stalkerware. It becomes something that could be helpful for intimate partner violence, right? And so that's one notion. So the notion that privacy is a technical thing, and there's a really good paper by Deirdre Mulligan in which he calls privacy an essentially contested concept. So it's something that is transformable, I'm saying, quote, it's transformable according to changing technological and social conditions. So the idea that privacy can be scoped as a purely technical issue is terrible. The other one that is really annoying, and as someone who's studied social media for a while, is the notion that if it's public, it's kind of free reign, without really acknowledging what are the harms of doing either aggregation or doing training on data. And so if something is ostensibly, quote unquote, public, that doesn't mean, it is ripe to train or to do whatever on. And this has come up a few times. It's really interesting too, because there was an incident a few months ago in which somebody had collected a kind of a tranche of Blue Sky messages and then hosted it on Hugging Face. And this sent Blue Sky users up the wall, even though this has sort of been something that had been done quite often for Facebook, for Twitter, and whatnot. And so it's really interesting to see that as this notion of, okay, you're doing this collection, and we have these tools of then training and then making some kind of inference from that. How does that change the relationship with these aggregations of data? And so I think those two things I really want to push against.
I think that the biggest thing that we need to unlearn about privacy is the idea that it is something that's new, or it's something that's radical that needs to be fought for. When the honest truth is that for the vast majority of humanity's existence, privacy has been the norm. It has been the default, and it's technology and technology's growth that has enabled the amount of data that can be collected and the ways in which it can be processed to radically increase, mostly in the last 2 to 2.5 decades, maybe last 3 at maximum. And what I think a lot of the people who do this harvesting and this processing have convinced us is this belief that all of this processing is the norm, and you need to tell me why you think things should be private, rather than them having to tell us why privacy, rather than being a norm, is a norm that should now no longer be applicable just because we have technical capabilities that we didn't really have before. The way that we run into this quite frequently at Signal is there are many instances where there are questions that folks ask us about. What about laws that govern public disclosure of conversations? What about laws that govern instances where record keeping needs to happen? And the response that we often give them is, if there are two people walking down a corridor, either in an episode of West Wing or in the real West Wing, nobody really says, take your notebook out, start writing everything that we are saying down because this is something that needs to be documented. And the reasoning behind that is all of those laws exist in order to make sure that there is accountability in government. And that is a very, very valuable goal, which usually means that decisions need to be documented, and the decisions and the reasoning behind those decisions need to be documented. What that does not mean is that you don't give anybody who's participating in those institutions the right to privacy by preventing them from using encrypted messaging services. And there are many other examples I could go into for how this ultimately plays out, but I think it's vital to recognize that I think the first privacy laws in the world explicit came out in the late 1960s, early 1970s. It was a couple of states in West Germany at that time, and then a couple of states in Canada that first started it off. But there's been a lot of writing and documentation of why privacy as a construct has existed in every single major religious text that has now existed for thousands of years, and how it plays out, and the ways in which society has dealt and grappled with it. So I absolutely agree with Alex that it's definitely something that the technological and social norms of the time regularly shine lights on in different ways, but we must get over having to defend why we think it's something we have and recognize that it is something innate in us as human beings.
And I have to say, from the point of view of me sitting in this chair, I agree so much that there's been such a fast rate of change that the ability to collect data, to scrape it, to collect it, to analyze it is moving so quickly, and we have no sense of what comes next. And while there's this idea that privacy is fundamental, and Signal is built on this idea that privacy is fundamental, for the sake of argument, in a world facing climate crisis and public health emergencies and democratic backsliding, all problems that some would argue require that kind of level of data transparency. Maybe the recording in the halls are necessary in these moments. How do you respond to critics who say that strong privacy protections are a luxury we can't afford in a broader context?
Yeah, I mean, I tell them that it's not a luxury, it's like an innate human right, and it's the people who call it a luxury are the people who exploit it the most. And it's the reason why it's okay for a rich person to have an anonymous Swiss bank account, while in order to get a loan, if you aren't a rich person, you have to literally give up all the information about your life in order to be made eligible for that because the bank wants to know you. So yes, privacy can be exercised differentially depending on what your level of privilege is, but I've yet to see a convincing argument that says that it's a luxury for everyone and not just a luxury for the people who can afford luxurious things. But in reality, I will also say that for each of the examples that you mentioned, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's democratic backsliding, in each and every one of them, I don't see a world in which we can even begin to solve those problems unless we have the right to privacy. Because it's very clear that in conversations that are taking place in today's world, there isn't a world in which only being public and transparent and having all conversations is going to solve all your problems. A back channel is just as important as that public debate because it gives people an opportunity to talk, to share information. It's why anonymity is important online, it's why whistleblower protections are really important, and all of these are norms that laws have recognized. The day-to-day practice of saying that it's important that emission data is necessary to be collected, so therefore let's not increase privacy legislation, are actually two very different things. So the kind of data that you need in order to solve those problems, and I agree with you, you do need data, does not involve reading people's DMs. Like reading people's DMs is never going to solve climate change, and it's definitely going to make democratic backsliding infinitely worse.
Yeah.
We're feeling that one in the audience.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, right, when we say that privacy is competing with transparency, well, I mean, we're not talking about user data here. I mean, we still don't know how much carbon, the aggregate models from OpenAI or Microsoft or Google are basically, are spewing into the atmosphere. We still don't know the amount of compute that it takes to train an OpenAI to GPT-5. I mean, these are things which are intentionally obscured. And I mean, even the transparency legislation in California to disclose how much water a data center takes, I mean, that will reach just intense industry opposition. To say, so data on corporations, data on the rich that ought to be in the public record for actual accountability, yes, that's transparent. But as I've said, like getting in someone's DMs is not the most important thing. I mean, so just full cosign. They scheduled this as a debate, but we're very much in agreement. Yeah.
Look, I'm going to try and find questions that may find the wedge, or at least explore the tensions. Something that I think is interesting is we're talking about there's a real conflation when it comes to the word data. And yeah, sorry, this is not in the script. We're going to go off script right now, which is I think sometimes imprecision of language serves powers that be to bundle all data in together. And there are very different kinds of data. And I think even things that are ostensibly public are still being held back. At Mozilla Foundation at the moment, we're working with a coalition to ask for access to social media data. And by social media content data, we mean the top 1,000 most popular viral posts that are on social media platforms. And this is ostensibly public. And the reason why this matters, it sounds trivial, but if something's going viral, that means that it's shaping public opinion. It's telling us what we know, we can understand things, and yet this is information that's being held in and seemingly trivial. And it seems like there's a real asymmetry between what we have to give away as individuals versus what can be hoarded or protected as a corporation. Alex, I know a lot of the work that you do looks at this stuff.
Yeah.
Could you share a thought on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. At first, I mean, just about the language, I think that's a very important thing. The same thing about AI, right? AI, everything it's called AI, right? And it, machine learning, spreadsheets, I mean, whatever, anything. Running a linear regression, it's all gets looped into AI. Okay, we're talking about different things. And one of the things that just sends me up the wall, this isn't about data, is that people say, well, can't we use AI for climate change? Sure, you can run an ARIMA model that does kind of forecasting, and that doesn't pollute, that doesn't take a leg to power, right? And so, I mean, there's this elision in what gets used. And so data is the same way. When we're talking about data, user data is not the same as climate data, isn't the same as all these different types of data. Then the other question is power and what we're doing and who's having it. And so I know Mozilla, I know that folks in the Knight Georgetown Institute, a former colleague of mine, Letitia Bodie, was one of the principals of that. I know she's supposed to be here, but has talked, and a lot of the folks in the Coalition for Independent Tech Research, I believe that's it, that Nathan Matias and Rebecca Trumbull are involved with, and many other folks in this room, are really focused on the idea that we need those kinds of data to hold power brokers to account, to hold state actors to account, and those are critical, right? Those are the types of critical things that we do need. So when we're thinking about data and thinking about data heterogeneity, thinking about what data is being produced by particular individuals, things that as people that are operating in public life, I mean, we do have a necessity to access to those data to mitigate harm. That's different from, the pictures of your dogs or the things that you posted on Flickr that have now ended up in Lion 400 or ImageNet or any of these, multiple data sets that exist out there.
I'm interested maybe in how Signal approaches this tension between the transparency that we need for accountability versus data protection. From a practical standpoint at Signal, where do you draw the line? Are there scenarios where you believe privacy should yield to other values, or is that a slippery slope?
No, we definitely think that privacy is both a fundamental right and at the very core of the proposition that sets our product apart in the marketplace. But there are many decisions that we make around how we implement privacy that ends up shaping how privacy exists in the world. So I'll give you an example. We take a lot of deliberate care to make sure that a lot of things that would drive engagement and our features that our competitors have don't get implemented in our application, because we think that some of those will make the kind of privacy that Signal gives people potentially risky at scale. So if you use Telegram, which you shouldn't, it's not end-to-end encrypted, you would ultimately realize that Telegram has channels and supergroups. So it's actually possible for hundreds of thousands of people to be in a single Telegram group where there's one-to-many communication. Similarly, excuse me, there's also a lot of conversation that happened around trying to make sure features that WhatsApp has, like communities, which are ways of having groups of groups. And both of these are features that many Signal users request all the time. But the thing that sets Signal apart in the marketplace is that a lot of the metadata that Telegram and WhatsApp collect to enable these features, we don't collect in the first place. So it's actually impossible for Signal to even know who is a part of a group. It is impossible for Signal to know who is talking to whom, a bunch of things that are necessary for these interactions. But we know that if we were to take that end-to-end encryption and bring it to 100,000 people talking to each other, which would make content moderation impossible, that's probably a world we don't want to at least currently see exist, because that level of end-to-end encryption at that scale would allow for conversations, and especially in moments of emergencies and communal tensions, lead to situations where things could escalate very rapidly, and we would have to walk back our privacy promises to ever be able to moderate content in that scenario. So that's just one example of how we have chosen to make privacy the ultimate goal, but despite that, make sure that there are other things that we don't do because we continue to treat it as the primary goal. And in this case, it's virality and engagement.
I love that you're talking about Signal thinking about every technology being a design choice. And there are things that you say no to, where you don't compete in the market, where you don't bring what your users say they want because you're underpinned by that value. And I think it reinforces the idea that the place where we are, and this goes back to the unlearning, we're in the place where we are because of choices, and we can make different choices. But when often, again, that slippery language, when we talk about choice, it gets reframed back from the choices that are being made either on a regulatory level or at a product level to individual choice. So if you don't want that, then don't use that thing, or you have to decide to use those settings, or the action's put back on the individual. I'd really love to explore in the 4 minutes that we have before we throw to the microphone, kind of that tension between collective and individual privacy. Alex, I know that you've done a lot of work on how data perpetuates inequality, but I'm interested in what gets lost when we frame privacy primarily through the lens of individual choice versus collective harm.
Yeah, that's a fantastic kind of thing. And I want to refer folks, there's a really excellent paper by Salome Viljoen, which is called Relational Theory of Data Governance. And in that paper, this paper is fantastic because what she does is and she starts thinking about individual kind of ideas of privacy. So if we think about privacy as, or rather data as property, the kind of proprietarian proposals, this is things that, folks like, the other one is Jared Lanier, the one about privacy as dignitarian. So privacy is, and this is more of an Andrew Yang proposal, here, we'll give you money for your data or whatever, and that you can see how that could have some pretty pernicious downstream consequences, right? And if we start thinking, the other one being data and one's privacy as dignitarian, so you just kind of have to respect one's data, but that has its own limitations as well. And the thing that Viljoen proposals that I think is really compelling is the idea that one's data and one's data traces can be used to harm somebody else. So kind of reporting or training on a class of people can then harm somebody that's in the class but you have any connection to, right? And so in that sense, thinking a bit about individual level versus collective means that we really have to reframe how we think about data governance. And so we're really thinking about data governance itself as being a collective enterprise and one that needs to be collectively managed, especially in Viljoen in her work suggests kind of a democratic approach to this. So because of that relational aspect of data. And so I think really approaching privacy kind of in the same way, putting it on the individual level is a much weaker framework because it puts those individual choices on people, whereas their data could be used to testify and indemnify somebody else. And so we need those collective mechanisms around data, and those need to be democratic in nature, and democratic in nature in which it protects the people who are the most marginalized in a collective, right?
I think it's that idea of taking care of the whole, and I see so many parallels in the privacy discussions with the way that the environment's handled, with the idea that like recycling and management of resources comes down to the individual and whether or not you properly wash out your yogurt pot, whether or not you properly set your settings, you're keeping your community safe. And I think it's a real abrogation of responsibility across the board. Did you want to jump in with
sure.
that one?
And I think that this may actually be a place where there would be some tension between thoughts that Alex and I have, but like definitely in a positive direction, which is both this is while prior to me being at Mozilla, but also while I was at Mozilla, there were many countries around the world that were actually trying to explore this idea of how do you make collective data governance happen, ideas of data trusts. And I think I also saw some private sector actors, for example, in this case in India, really push the idea of data trusts and really push the idea of collective data governance because they knew that it would be easier to make 500,000 people vote that something should happen than convince someone that this is a good practice for someone who's actually an expert in privacy. And of course, the languages that they were using for this came very much from India. Of course, has like many natural resources and has a rich history of collective organizing around like how do resource extraction from the ground benefit the communities that live on that ground, which is something that's there in many other parts of the world as well. And they use that analogy, but the way that they wanted to use it in practice was it should be absolutely okay for these 500,000 cab drivers to be able to come together to unionize, which is great, so that they can give their data to us, which is great, so that then we can then use it to determine how to price them better, which is not that great. But that last bit is the piece that like they very explicitly had ideas and norms of incentivizing via financial payments, via like other benefits, by saying, if you decide to share this data with us, then we will give you health insurance when you're driving those cabs, right? Like, and you're starting to see that the same things that make democracy dicey sometimes are this, which is that like sometimes like actors can exploit systems and fissures in order to get what they want while seeming to still aspire towards a broader goal, is something that I think could also very much happen in collective governance of privacy. So I'm a big fan of collective governance of privacy, but I do think that there are many pretty difficult questions of how do we make sure that we take something that we believe is an innate part of our humanity, and yet we want to exercise in a collective form together, and try to strike that balance where what are the set of practices that it should not be possible for you to be able to give away, even if you collectively decide that you want to do so, because they would violate that very fundamental norm.
I think the red thread that I hear, it almost feels like we've perfectly come full circle back to Alex's original point of what's outmoded, which is the idea that privacy is necessarily technical. You're talking about so many sociological and economic factors and incentives at play around how do we actually move the reality of privacy and create it. We've got 18 minutes left, which is your time to come to the microphone and ask questions. I hope to get through 5, 6, 7 questions. So the microphones are just here. You can see our wonderful volunteer, Mia. We're going to throw to the gentleman in the dark blue first, and then the excellent watermelon lady will go second. Please.
Is this thing on?
It sure is.
Great. John Bennick with Journal Foundation. So when we have more data in the future, higher quantity, and there's more places to send our data, does Signal, when you think about what Signal's doing 10 years from now, what are the other use cases for the other things that humans will want to do or need to do or be doing with their data?
At least the way that we look at it, we think that the two main contributions that Signal has made to the technology ecosystem are one, of course, the Signal app and the features within the Signal app, but the other is the Signal protocol. And the Signal protocol today is used by more than 3.5 billion people around the world to communicate with each other. And the properties that make it good at privacy, which is the kinds of ways in which it does end-to-end encryption, are actually also very well suited for other kinds of data transmission that have nothing to do with messaging. It is actually also a protocol that can be used in order to send things not just between humans, but also between machines. And we have already seen some of those use cases be deployed in the real world. And right now, I would say some of the most interesting work that we are doing is the parts around making the Signal protocol quantum resistant are actually, according to us, really pushing some of the technology of what's even possible quite far. And I'll give you an example. The reason it's really hard, like the standards that would make things quantum resistant are now actually like publicly available. They've been approved by NIST and are a part of like most best practices. But the problem with messaging is that trying to implement those standards while maintaining the kind of latency expectations that people have, there's no point if my conversation with you is quantum resistance if when I say hello, you hear it 1 minute later. Because then like that entire experience breaks. And there's a lot of innovation that we've been doing within the protocol to try to keep things quantum resistant, but make them much smaller in size so that we can retain a lot of the properties that exist today in the protocol. That in particular, I think, is a use case that will actually have a lot of very beneficial use cases well outside of messaging as well, because in a lot of the ways in which things are being deployed, whether it's self-driving cars, whether it's like connected cities and connected homes, all of those things are places where latency is really, really important, and ultimately things are just talking to each other. I don't think Signal as an organization, or at least the foundation itself, is going to develop those use cases, but we very much treat the Signal protocol as a public good released under the GNU license for the community to help create these use cases.
Alex, did you want to add anything to just the idea of like what will be in 10 years that we should be thinking about from a data and privacy perspective?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, what are we going to have in terms of kind of modalities, right? I mean, I imagine there's going to be quite a lot of video. It's going to be, I mean, we're already kind of awash in that. I mean, I'm a bit worried about the proliferation of Meta Ray-Bans and the idea that, you know, glass holes are back and we need to ridicule them into the ground again. But I mean, I think that kind of thing is very concerning. And so I'm thinking about there's going to be kind of different vectors, and especially the kind of second order types of elements of privacy, especially if we're seeing things that get regurgitated or perpetuated through large language models, and that's going to be on the web. So I imagine that's going to be a much more prevalent issue. Yeah, but I'm curious on the kind of creative strategies that we use to try to mitigate those.
Thank you. Next question.
So my name is Rawan Daman. I'm the Director General of ARIJ, Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. We work with investigative journalists and fact checkers in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. All of our community are using Signal all the time for all of our investigations. And that is a case about mental safety for me as a director, helping me think that our community is safe. This is something extremely important, and you should always highlight the mental safety of people coaching investigative journalists and fact checkers on the ground. Yet, many people in the communities, marginalized communities in the Middle East and North Africa, they don't know anything about Signal. They have never heard of that. What's your plan to disseminate much larger than the silos of digital rights and investigative journalists to reach much more people? In Gaza, for example, we worked with journalists there, and some of them never heard of Signal and needed to shift them from other applications to Signal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The way that we do that currently, at least, is, I don't know if many people know this, but like Signal's marketing budget every year is $0. The origins of Signal as a, like I would say, idea come very much from anarchist roots combined with the Silicon Valley culture that when good technology exists, it will be discovered, and that being combined with us being an open source project and the word of mouth really helping the cybersecurity community validate Signal first, and then everybody who turns to the cybersecurity community saying, who do we use? The community saying, please use Signal, and then that like has kept cascading every year, and there are more and more people who come on board. But there's never really been a dedicated attempt on our part outside, I would literally say, of the help center to really talk about why you should use Signal, what are the ways in which it's better. I'll also say it's not much of a giveaway, I guess, but this is being live streamed. But if you look at the Signal website, you will see that the Signal website and everything that's around it and the whole product is designed to be a messenger that works for everyone as a normal messenger. It's almost that the end-to-end encryption and the part that makes its privacy really strong is not a flag we wave a lot. We literally say, if you want to use the messenger, please consider us because we're a good messenger. And you get the best privacy in the market and in the ecosystem, but that last bit is literally something that's such an integral part of the product that we don't draw too much attention to it. And a big part of that is actually survival. Because of the size of the organization, we are also in a world where, in particular in the Middle East, there are many countries that actually ban Signal because of the fact that its privacy properties interfere with their goals of lawful interception. And that's by no means a problem limited to that region, but it's also spreading in many other places in the world. And we're very careful to not draw attention to ourselves in such a particular way that would mean that if that list is 2 countries today, we don't want it to become 5 countries tomorrow. And actively promoting ourselves as that does end up creating that risk. So which is why we very much build one of the best messenger products in the world that also happens to be really, really good at privacy, because then there are lots more reasons for people to use the product rather than just the privacy, and that helps it survive for much longer in the world.
Thank you. I fear that we're becoming the Signal AMA, but honestly, in a privacy world, I'm here for it. Are there any more questions that people want to jump up and give? And could I just have, because we've only got 10 minutes, so by way of hands, does anybody else have a question? We've got 1, 2, 3, great. We're going to rip through these, so I reckon we can do about 2 minutes per question to make sure we're on time and we hit everybody.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Maya Bogatai, Open Data and Intellectual Property Institute. A question coming from a lawyer. In a way, we have already unlearned privacy. I'm doing this in a provocative way. Because privacy, on one hand, it is a private right that individuals could discipline platforms who are building AI without taking consideration whether they have the real consent to do this. And then, on the other hand, exactly this, platforms are really not, speaking from the European perspective, not taking in consideration all the GDPR rules, and there is nobody who would try this as Max Schrems did in the past in the court. Not that I want to see this happen, but in a way, this is already unlearned principle in a way, but whoever builds AI fears privacy because they know that they don't have everything completely not being in a shadow a little bit. So my question is privacy still what it was in the past, or we are unlearning by doing? Thank you.
Thank you. And then maybe it's not just an unlearning, but an undoing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's unlearning per se. It's just ignoring or not considering at all. I mean, I think unlearning has a bit to do with thinking about, as Professor Benjamin said this morning, about asking the right questions. And so, what are the questions around privacy that need to be asked? And I'm not even sure that the people who are building AI models are concerned about privacy, so to speak. They're more concerned about copyright, and they're more concerned about that. And I mean, copyright is probably, if you wanted a real debate, you would have a debate about copyright, and copyright as a real protection around artists' IP, because I think people in this community probably have a lot of different opinions on that. And so I think companies are much more afraid of perhaps IP claims because those are the only ones that can be litigated to the degree that may actually make them culpable. But with regards to privacy, especially in the LLM space, I mean, it's kind of gone out the door.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think there are ways in which the enforcement of privacy is becoming harder and harder, both for technical as well as like social reasons. But I also think that one of the consequences of that is I don't think there's ever been more evidence of why privacy is important as a right than like today. And tomorrow there will be more evidence, and the day after that there will be more evidence because of the ways in which a lot of this information is being processed, right? And whether it's the fact that like it is possible today to have LLM models where depending on how many images you train into it, like you can literally give it a name and it'll generate a face that looks exactly like that name because of all the things that were present in its data set. That's the kind of like, if I were a privacy campaigner 10 years ago and someone told me that could happen, I would be like really excited. But today we are awash with instances of that happening, and there isn't enough political will, I think, to recognize that that's a harm and to do something about it. So I think that a lot of the work that we've done in this space so far has been quite protective, trying to prevent bad things from happening rather than to to call out bad things when they're happening, gather evidence, and then hold those who have led those bad things to happen account, that I do think that we need to like sort of reprioritize that a little bit, because by focusing on the preventative pieces, we sometimes, I think, redirect our efforts from places of where we can stop bad things from happening to like prevent, like they don't get the attention that they deserve. And this is, I think, is more true in some jurisdictions and less true in others. But in Europe, I've definitely noticed that the kind of complaints and the kinds of conversations that are happening are not necessarily matching up to the actual public evidence of the kind of harms that are occurring in people's lives every day.
I actually want to take it one step further and say we can take defensive action, we can take pushback, serious pushback and accountability action, but beyond that, it's building the alternatives that allow people to have the kind of online experience or the world that we want to see. And I think that's the whole thrust of what we're doing here right now. And I think Signal does provide an example of the way that you can do something different and build a competitor in the market, which means that maybe the market moves in that direction because people move that way. I know we've got 2 more questions and I don't want to miss them out. We're going to have to do it really fast and we're going to do speed answers.
Jessica Salinas with New Media Ventures, Impact Fund across media, civic technology, and democracy. I just came from another session where that was around journalism and who owns the truth. And they talked about how journalism and media, their role is to hold power accountable. What I heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, and the thought that's sitting with me is someone said climate change is not solved in the DMs, and the other person agreed. And I'm sitting here as an individual who believes in the individual right to privacy, but is also working across democracy, where I know in the United States, we, for example, have the Freedom of Information Act, right? Where we believe that we should know how our officials are coming to decisions that impact us. And we have seen government officials use Telegram and use kind of this right to privacy as a backdoor to make decisions off the backs of a lot of communities that I care about. So is the thought here, maybe this is more a philosophical question, is the philosophical here that the right to privacy or privacy just supersedes that, and there are just these trade-offs that we're going to have to make?
That is such a great question, and thank you for that. And I mean, idealistically, I'd like to hope that these things are not in contention, and that the kind of ways that we make open reference requests are ideally in ways that we can make them for governments that can be forthcoming, or rather have official records, but we know that's certainly not the case, right? And one of the trade-offs that I think with regards to things like, tools like Signal is that governments are using those tools, but so are dissidents. And I mean, and so are journalists. I mean, those are critical ways of managing it. And I mean, those mechanisms that are in place that grant journalists and grant people who are holding power to account, those are not technical fixes. I mean, those are the things that are going to be whistleblowers. They're going to be people in government who are going to leak. I mean, that's how we know a lot of what we know. So I know that may not be a satisfying answer, but it's also kind of, if you have one, you can't really have the other.
Yeah, super quickly, I actually think that in reality, the way that bureaucracy operates, there are more than enough spaces for that kind of documentation to take place. Like, if I give you an example, today, if I make a decision as a bureaucrat, usually there's either a digital or a paper file. That file has all the reasoning, and I first approve it, then it goes to my boss approves it, then it goes to my boss, and my boss approves it, and that entire file can be asked for under Freedom of Information requests, because it's that file that contains the reasoning for why a decision was made in a certain way. That's very, very different from every single thing that is being said in a meeting from being recorded and also being made a part of the file. And I don't think anyone, even those transparency laws, don't say everything that every government person ever says must always be recorded. They say every decision that a government person makes must be recorded with reason and be made available to the public so that government can be held to account. So I absolutely agree with Alex that I don't think they're necessarily as at tension with each other as they've been made out to be, but there's no law that can force people to comply with it. So even if a law says that you have to do something in a certain way and you have to make certain decisions and you don't, that's definitely something that I think a lot of governments around the world are looking into, updating their laws because of how technology is used in practice. and maybe even outlawing, saying certain things must be done in places that are also open to the public. And it's probably something that'll take a couple of years to play out, but I think it's a problem that the world will reconcile.
And our very last question.
Hi, Andrea Middleton. I work with a company that, in the wake of generative AI, is deeply interested in identifying which accounts are human and which are not. And also deeply believes that privacy is a right. And there's a tricky bit in there with how do you qualify someone as, yes, real organic human, and still keep that person's privacy by hopefully not capturing any PII or the minimal PII on our servers. And I'm curious if you have any insights into that friction or best practices that you wanted to talk about.
We've got 57 seconds left. So I'm going to ask for a yes, no, and maybe we catch up in that conversation afterwards, unless you've got a one sentence.
One sentence. What is the data they're collecting? What is the purpose of making that discernment? And I have so much more questions. I'm answering your question with a question.
So the way I'm going to sum this up is there are many tensions, and I think everyone sitting here has probably a question about the way that that rubber hits the road in the part of this ecosystem that we're talking about that you work in. And I'd invite everybody to be thinking about those tensions, to be thinking about the questions, and these wonderful people are going to be around all weekend, and there are many experts around as well. So please keep asking the questions, challenging and digging into what's out there when it comes to privacy. And if nothing else, you know, we've thought about structural harms, we've thought about practical challenges. Find somebody this week who you can solve that with, or who you can bounce an idea with. So first of all, thank you everybody for your questions. They were fantastic. And thank you to our wonderful panelists for Unlearning Privacy. Thank you.
All of our speakers, and we will see you all back here this afternoon after you enjoy a little bit of time off at 6:30 for our next debate on unlearning creativity. 6:30, see you back then. Enjoy a little bit of time to yourselves. Thanks again to our speakers.